Hey Raghunath, tell everyone about our Patreon community.
Sure, Kaustubha. The Wisdom of the Sages Patreon community is an incredible online yoga resource. If you like the type of yoga wisdom and culture we share on the show, then our Patreon community is a great next step. This is a listener-supported podcast, and any level of sponsorship will unlock a wide range of live and archived classes, talks, and even workshops.
Raghunath teaches, I teach, and we have a host of other excellent teachers on topics ranging from yoga philosophy, asana classes, storytelling, Ayurveda, kirtan, cooking, meditation, and a lot more.
We even have an incredible online Bhakti 12-step recovery group.
So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/wisdom of the sages.
All right, let's get it on.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
How do we start it again? Live from Cali, Colombia. This is Wisdom of the Sages, your daily yoga podcast. Today, I will be your host, Kaustubha Das. Raghunath is taking a little vacation today, but it's our special interview today. We have a special guest, but before we get there, good morning to you, Mara. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thanks, Kaustubh.
All right. And what's the latest? We got any announcements to make?
We do. We have a Bhakti recovery group meeting today at 9:30. Katie Bell is offering a satsang for our Patreon members at 10:30 a.m. And then tomorrow we'll be back at 6 a.m. for the show.
Okay, that's it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, well then we may as well just jump right into it, right? We have a very special guest. This is a guest that we want to bring on on a regular basis, and so we're very happy to have him here again. This is Chaitanya Charan Das. He's a monk. Currently he lives in the Govardhan Eco Village, just a couple hours outside of Mumbai. But we also know him as the spiritual scientist. He's a brilliant engineer as well as a brilliant Bhakti-yogi. And we always, personally, I feel that Chaitanya Charan Prabhu is really one of the best communicators of Bhakti. He's got a brain that is like very dexterous, and he's in one sense it's the brain of an engineer, but he's able to in so many helpful ways explain Bhakti philosophy, make it practical, make it understandable for us. So Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, welcome back to Wisdom of the Sages.
Thank you, Kaustubha, for inviting me. Delighted to be here with you. And as
Wonderful
far as the expressness of the brain is concerned, I would say that I learned from your podcast a lot about how to share bhakti in a very accessible, sensitive, as well as consistent way. So I'm grateful to be here and to be of some service.
We're learning from you, actually. But thank you. And we were thinking about what's a good topic to discuss today, and I thought let's tie it into what we've been reading recently in the Bhagavatam. Now we're in the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, and the fourth canto opens up. It gets pretty quick. It gets pretty exciting. We were in the third canto. We went through about 9 chapters, which were more didactic. It was the teachings of Kapila to Devahuti. Just one-on-one questions and answers going back and forth. But as soon as we enter that fourth canto, quickly we find ourselves thrown into some very exciting pastimes and stories. And right off the bat, you have this story about Daksha, very interesting character. And I want to speak to you about who Daksha is, but just to briefly share with you where we're at right now in Bhagavatam. We hear about Daksha, and he enters into a... Now, Daksha, for those, I found that a lot of people listen, some people listen to Wisdom of Sages just like the interview days or just like the question and answers days. So for people that aren't following along with us every day, we're reading in the Bhagavatam on the weekdays. Daksha is this very important universal figure. He's very respected. He's known as one of the Prajapatis, which means his universal responsibility is in relation to populating the universe. He's a very he's seen as a very highly placed, influential religious figure. And his mood or his outlook in life, you could categorize it as very Vedic and very karmic. In other words, he was living a life of regulations, a life of ritual, a life of religious ritual, in a very precise way, with the goal of receiving very precise, I guess you could say, results. And so we hear about Daksha. He walks into a public assembly where everyone immediately stands to respect him, but Lord Shiva doesn't get up. Now, Lord Shiva happens to be his son-in-law, and he feels very insulted by this. He becomes angry, and he begins to speak very harsh words against Lord Shiva, as well as cursing Lord Shiva. Their whole, Lord Shiva's followers stand up and they fight back, and they have their words and curses and counter curses are going on between the community of Daksha and his religious followers and the community of Lord Shiva, who are a very kind of like unusual group of characters who are tamasic in a sense, like some of their qualities wouldn't appear to be so Vedic or religious. At the same time, they have a very sincere kind of attachment or very sincere kind of devotion to Lord Shiva, which is something of substance. So fast forward, and we find that Shiva's wife, Daksha's daughter, Sati, wants to go to a big event at Daksha's home. Shiva warns her that your father doesn't like me very much, and he's not going to have bad things to say about me, and I don't think you're going to have a good time, and I don't think it's a good idea. But if you really want to go, you can go. So she goes. Daksha treats her very coldly, and she gets up and in a very dramatic way begins to condemn Daksha and condemn his outlook and his consciousness and where he's at. And then she very dramatically commits suicide by she's this yogic power to draw the fire out of the body, and she in front of everyone commits suicide. Chaos ensues. Daksha has his head cut off, and all of his followers have to go to Lord Brahma and say, we don't know what to do now, everything's a big mess. Brahma instructs them, you've offended a great personality. Just because Lord Shiva looks different, it doesn't mean that he's not a great soul. He's actually incredibly deep, important, devoted soul. You need to go and apologize to him. Everyone goes to him, they apologize, and now we're at the point where now they're back with Daksha trying to do this ceremony again, and Lord Vishnu appears. But this is what I'm sorry if that took a while, but this is what I would like to ask you, start our conversation with, Prabhu, is what is Bhagavatam trying to illustrate here? And how can, or at least, how can it be applied? Or what is a message that we're meant to take with this that may be very practical in our current, world?
Yeah. It is, at one level, the stories from the Bhagavatam can seem very, very strange. The strangeness can be from three different perspectives. First is from the perspective of the kind of beings that are there and the kind of abilities they have. Like say, as I said, a person's head being replaced with a goat's head, something like that.
Yeah.
So those are things which can seem very strange. The forms that people have and the abilities that people have, they can also seem strange. And the third thing is even sometimes the actions that people do. Now, for example, say Sati ends her life by self-immolation. So the actions can also seem a little strange. But underlying all these, there are some things which are very common, which are, you could say, not just common, universal. That one of the things is that characters have to make choices. Their choices have consequences. And those choices are made with some contemplation. So the essential point is that we also live in a world where we have to make choices, and our choices do have consequences. And what can we contemplate by which we can choose wisely?
Okay.
So so in terms of the abilities, the actions, the attributes, there are differences. But in terms of choices, contemplation and consequences. There are universals. So
Choices,
if we get
contemplations, and consequences.
and consequences. So now exactly what the characters contemplate may be different because they are in a particular situation. So in one sense, if we consider even now in today's world, we have something, say we have Star Wars, or we have so many Harry Potter. Now people watch it at one level for the action, but then they contemplate, okay, this character chose like this at this point, this chose like this at this point. And there's a lot of thought and analysis. What this character did the right thing or the wrong thing? What happened? So broadly, the Bhagavatam's purpose is, you could say, twofold. One is the Bhagavatam is spoken to Parikshit Maharaj to help him to remember Krishna. So that is the ultimate purpose. But how does remembrance of Krishna manifest in the course of events in life? So in one sense, this whole pastime of Daksha is a pastime in which Lord Krishna doesn't appear much. Neither Krishna nor Vishnu appears much. It's more of Shiva, and now Shiva, as we know, is one of the devatas within the broad Vedic system of administration of the universe. That is described as one of the most powerful beings in the universe. But the idea is, overall, this pastime is illustrating that once our consciousness becomes separated from a transcendental purpose, and remembering Krishna is actually the ultimate transcendental purpose. Remembrance, because Krishna is the being who will fulfill our heart's longing for lasting love and lasting life. So the Bhagavatam has a vision that we all are meant to mold our life in a way that we are remembering Krishna. And through all our activities. And when we don't remember Krishna, there are different degrees of dysfunction, disintegration, and even degradation that may result.
And that's what we certainly saw in this past. Now it's interesting. The whole what set the whole thing off is Daksha felt insulted by the way that Shiva responded, or let's say neglected to respond to him. But it becomes revealed that the part of the reason, or maybe the entire reason, why Lord Shiva didn't stand in that moment and greet him as all others did, was because his mind was at that moment deeply absorbed in Lord Vishnu. He was like actually in meditation at that time. So we see one character, Lord Shiva, who he appears, let's say, adharmic in a sense, or he, in other words, on the surface level, the way he's dressed appears very dirty. He's wearing a garland of skulls, right? He's covered in ash. From an external point of view, or from, let's say, from Daksha's, let's say, more religious background, he might judge that as unworthy or condemnable in some way. Although Shiva's consciousness was actually exactly where his religion is meant to end up, right? Like deeply absorbed in God.
That's true. Yeah.
Whereas Daksha, he's this person, he's got all this respect and this position and so on, and he's living in this very Vedic or religious context, and apparently very rigidly, very properly, but his consciousness seems to be prone to anger, a need for prestige. Ultimately, he made so many bad choices that led to the let's say, condemnation by his daughter, the suicide of his daughter, the chaos of his whole, religious ceremony was disrupted. But it seems like it's pointing us to what, in today's language, a lot of people would refer to as, say, the distinction between religion and spirituality, that you have a religious context on one side, you have a spiritual context on the other side. And we got to see kind of a juxtaposition of the two. Oh, and I'm afraid that Chaitanya Charan has frozen up on us right as we're getting to the juicy stuff. So I'm hoping that he's... Oh, here we go. You're back, Faru?
Yeah, I'm there.
Can you hear me? Did you hear what
Yes.
I'm not sure. You heard what I said?
No, we lost you for about 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, where I got was I said that in one it seems like in our modern vernacular, we might frame this this incident and the juxtaposition of the two characters, Daksha and Shiva, as the difference between religion in the case of Daksha and spirituality in the case of Shiva.
Yeah, that's nicely put. I was thinking of the same thing. We could call that Shiva is, in one sense, spiritual but not religious, and Daksha is religious but not spiritual.
Right.
Now,
So, yeah, why don't we? Could you help us define those terms? Like, because I think it's very popular
Yeah.
for people. I forget the statistic. I mean, you may even know it, but like, from what I understand, there's a very large percentage of people in Western countries that now identify with no religion but identify as being spiritual. But what that actually means is not always really well articulated. It can be vague.
True. So first thing is that words don't have fixed meanings. The meanings of words also keep changing. So 50 years ago, 70 years ago, when Einstein said that the deeply religious instinct, which makes one wonder, where did the universe come from? How is the order of the universe coming? So when he was using the word religious, most people would today use the word spiritual.
Right.
So let's look at first, when people say spiritual but not religious, in what sense are the words being used? Now, that's not the only sense in which the words are used. Sometimes when two people use the word in two different senses, then there can be a lot of confusion. So
Conflict where there really is none.
Yeah.
Like maybe
that's
they're actually in agreement, but they have different ideas of what the terms mean.
Yeah, exactly. So if we consider, when somebody says, I'm spiritual but not religious, they have a particular conception of religion in their mind. And I read somewhere that people associate religion with three things basically. That is ritualism, intolerance, and you could say institutionalization, bureaucracy. Basically, those three things are that you are made to believe certain things, you are made to do certain things, and overall you give up your reasoning faculty, your free will, your capacity to take responsible decisions. So in that sense, ritualism, dogmatism, you could say another word, you could use it. This is what I do, this is what I believe, and this is whom I follow. There's some institutionalization, some hierarchy is there, whom I follow. And these three are generally considered to be quite unpalatable. And there is reason for that.
Yeah.
There is reason for that, that all these three have led to people acting in less than exemplary ways, to put it mildly. So when people say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, that means they say, I don't want to be dogmatic, I don't want to be ritualistic, and I definitely don't want to be like simply a mere mouthpiece for somebody else to speak through me. I'm not a puppet in somebody else's hands. So that sense is definitely valid. If you see the Bhagavad-gita at its end states that Vimrishyaita dasheshena yathechita kuru. Krishna says, deliberate deeply and then you do as you desire. So Krishna is not calling upon Arjuna for simply obedience. In one sense, Krishna within the Bhagavad Gita's vision is God. Although he's God, he doesn't draw upon his godhood to demand obedience. If that's what he had wanted, then he could have just completed the Bhagavad Gita in 6 words. I am God, obey me, fight. And that could have been the entire Gita, but he doesn't do that. So the idea is the Bhagavad Gita itself is a book of deliberation. So that aspect of being dogmatic or irrational, the Bhagavad Gita does not support that. Then another thing that the Bhagavad Gita is the last verse is one of its concluding verses, Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. So that can be actually said to be a call to give up religiosity. Sarva Dharman Parityajya. That ritualism specifically. Give up all rituals. Give up all ritualistic ideas of what you should be doing. And Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. Do the things that will help you come closer to me. That will help you evolve spiritually so that you come closer to me. So in that sense, this apprehension of either dogmatism or ritualism, which is there with respect to religion, The Bhagavad Gita's approach is not is far different from that. So when somebody says, I want to be spiritual, what they generally mean is they are open to some higher experiences. They want some meaning and purpose in their life. They want to, you could say, gain a certain level of self-mastery, rise above the emotions and the drives that otherwise normally control us, be more forgiving, be more composed. So these are the broad associations with the word spiritual. That's my understanding. You can also elaborate on your experiences about what spiritual but not religious means when people use it in that sense.
Well, yeah, there are a few things that I think of, what I think people are getting at when they're discussing the difference between the two, and one would be that religion seems to be focused on differences, right, and judgment. It's pointing out differences. It's here are the sinners and here are the followers of God. Whereas spirituality seems to be focused more on the commonality in all living beings. Spirituality is generated or lives in that space where we're kind of recognizing the oneness, and there's more of a mood of acceptance than judgment. Another thing I think of is when it comes to regulations and rules and so on. Religion is, in one sense, I think what we see in Daksha is it's almost like the regulation is, and I would say this is a shallow understanding of religion, but we're speaking in kind of like generalities or stereotypes right now. But the stereotype of religion is that the regulation itself is practically like if you follow the regulation, you are successful at religion. Whereas with spirituality, the value of the regulation is in relation to the transformation that the regulation is meant to facilitate. And if you actually transform and become like the things that you mentioned, more forgiving, more kind, more deeply contemplative, more internally connected to God, if you've achieved that state, then actually the regulation itself can be neglected, because you've already achieved the goal of the regulation. All right. So commonly the religious person is thinking, I follow all these regulations, but they may have had no transformation whatsoever. And then a third, I was just thinking, it seems that religion is very focused on salvation. The idea that I've committed sin, or even I'm sinful by nature, right? I was created in sin, and I'm seeking salvation. I'm seeking relief from the consequences of that sin. Therefore, I do my regulations. Therefore, I follow these certain rules. Therefore, I profess my faith. Whereas spirituality it more begins with the idea that by nature I'm not sinful. By nature I'm actually pure, and what I want to do is revive that purity, get back to that. So it seems that one is it seems to have a darker kind of tone to it. You're sinful. You better bow down now, otherwise you're condemned to the results of your sin. And the other one is like, no, you are a bright, beautiful, divine light, and somehow you're out of touch with that. You need to recover that, Those are some thoughts in my mind about the difference between the two.
Yeah, that's a very important one. Actually, rules. I was recently at an interfaith conference, and there was a Christian pastor was speaking. They had done some survey among the youth. What is your conception of a priest? As one youth from some University of America, he said, a priest is someone who is constantly worried that someone somewhere is having some fun.
Right. That's so great.
So often the rules are seen to be meant to deprive us of all the enjoyable things of life.
Right.
Now, that is not the purpose at all. But regulation does seem to evoke rules and regulations. Do this, don't do this. They do seem to evoke that kind of response, and religion is quite often associated with that. Yeah. And now, to some extent, go to the other side now, the rules themselves are not inherently restrictive or undesirable.
Right.
To do anything, we need rules. Even if you want to play sports, if you want somebody also play cricket or tennis, now if nobody follows rules, then there'll be no game. So in that sense, rules themselves are not bad, but the problem comes when somebody is told to follow the rules without being told the purpose of the rules. So, why should you hit the ball like this and not like that in sport, in football or in cricket or in any other sports? What is the point of it all? So over the years, many times, many of the religions of the world have focused more on just adherence to the rules with a call for faith. If you do this, then one day you'll attain salvation. One day you will get liberated. You'll be saved. But how following that particular rule leads to an evolution of consciousness, it leads to a transformation, that is not so much described. So in one sense, if you could say that rules, they are like the fences on a road. Regulation is meant to help us go on a particular road. But if I don't see the road, if I don't have the light to see what road I'm going along, then what is the point of following any regulation at all? So this is where maybe I could elaborate a little bit on spirituality, what we mean more from the Gita's perspective.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Okay. So
no, that sounds
three
great.
Yeah. So in my understanding, the word spirituality can refer to three things. The most common thing which people refer to is a state of mind, an emotion. Oh, I feel very spiritual. That means I feel very calm. I feel very contented. I feel very relaxed. That's the idea of spirituality.
At
spirituality
peace.
State of mind. At peace, yeah. Or peace, connected, whole. Now that's definitely one part of spirituality. But there's a lot more to it. The way the Bhagavad-gita explains it, spirituality is not just a state of mind. It is also a level of reality. It's a level of reality. There is the body, which is physical, which is one level of reality. And there is the soul, which is spiritual. That is another level of reality. So that's the second aspect. And from the Bhagavad-gita's perspective, that is the fundamental differentiation. And what is material is that which is temporary. Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate sataha. And everything material is temporary. And we long for things that are enduring. And that's why, in one sense, the human search for security, it may be through our security, should be through our physical health, through our bank balance, through various social arrangements. The search for security is ultimately a search for spirituality. And a search for spirituality is not in a vague sense, it is a search for spiritual reality. So that is, there's a level of reality which is spiritual. And when one gets to that level of spiritual reality, then naturally one experiences the state of mind which we call as spiritual. So in much of contemporary parlance, spirituality is seen as a state of mind, as an emotional state of emotions, state of mind. But how do you get that state of mind? That state of mind is actually connected with a level of reality. Okay. And then a third aspect of spirituality is the process to get to that level of reality. So, for example, yoga, meditation, prayer, mantra chanting, these are all spiritual. What do we mean by that? That means they are pathways or processes for getting to that level of reality. And so if we can compare, say, a metaphor of a mountain. So somebody is at the bottom of a mountain and they get a glimpse of the peak of the mountain. Maybe there's a lot of clouds over there. There's a thick cover of greenery, because of which they don't see the peak of the mountain. But the peak of the mountain is extremely beautiful. When they get a glimpse of that peak, it's one of the most uplifting sights they have ever had. So getting that occasional sight of that higher reality, that is like the spiritual state of mind that leads to what we call as spiritual experiences. So I may be at the bottom of the mountain, but from there, I might occasionally get a glimpse of the peak of the mountain. So I experienced that it was such a spiritual experience for me, let me say. So that's wonderful if somebody has a spiritual experience like that. At the same time, I'm still right now at the bottom of the mountain. And I have not yet got to the top of the mountain. That's why I may have a very profound spiritual experience today. And tomorrow, I may just go back to relapse to my normal way of living which has very little spiritual in it.
Mhm.
So that's why if I'm at the bottom of the mountain and I have a glimpse that there is the top of the mountain, it is extraordinarily beautiful, then I need a path to get to the top of the mountain.
Mhm.
I need a path to get. So spirituality can refer to these three things. There is the top of the mountain is a particular level of reality. So that is the spiritual reality. Then second is the glimpse of that spiritual reality. That is the spiritual state of mind or spiritual experience. And third is the pathway to get to that reality.
Okay.
The pathway to get to that reality.
Mhm.
So the reality, state of mind, and pathway. So all these three are what people, what we can say broadly refer to spirituality. Now, what has happened in it's not just in contemporary world, you can say even in Daksha's times, is that sometimes people follow a particular path, which is actually meant to take me to the top of the mountain, but I follow that path for some other purposes. Maybe I am in a society where doing those religious activities gives me a sense of prestige, gives me a sense of respect. And I'm actually going up that path, but I'm not going all the way up the path. I'm just going a little bit up. I'm saying how much higher than everyone else I am. And I'm proud of that. So in one sense, I am going up, but I'm not looking up. I'm looking down. I'm looking down to see how much lower than me everyone else is. So that could be somebody is following a path that can take them up, but they are themselves, that they're not actually really going up. Their consciousness is still down. So that's what happens when sometimes the people who are following something religious, they end up with a holier than thou attitude. That I am better than you are. What you said about acceptance versus judgment. The judgmentality is a very strong characteristic of people who are religious but not spiritual. Because if I am really spiritual, okay, I may be high up and I may be much higher up than everyone else. But my vision will be how much higher up there is to go for me. And that will bring humility. If I look up to the distance that I have to go, what awaits me in the future, that brings humility. But if I use my practices, whatever I'm practicing, to look down at others, then that brings judgmentality, that brings condemnation, that brings an overall attitude of, we could say, discrimination, in a negative sense. And that's very unhealthy. Now, I was in Texas, and I think I mentioned this in one of my earlier podcasts. I saw one poster, a car bumper. That person had written that, "Oh God, please save me from your preachers."
Yes. From your followers. Yes.
So the idea is the preachers have a holier than thou attitude. I don't want anything to do with such people. Right. So if I'm on that path, but I'm looking down, then that is something which is ritualistic. So Daksha, if you go back to our pastime, Daksha was looking, he was not looking up. It was a religious gathering where a sacrifice was to be performed. A ceremony was there, which yajna was to be performed over there. But for him, that yajna, it didn't have so much of a spiritual import as a social import. That yajna was not to direct one's consciousness toward the divine. The yajna was, oh, I am performing such a elaborate ceremony. Just see how prosperous I am, how pious I am. And when that was his vision, what happened was, if I am doing something to gain respect from others, then if I see people are not respecting me, then it becomes unbearable. Why am I doing this? How dare somebody not respect me? So how dare somebody not respect me?
What's the point to all this?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So he was religious in the sense that he was doing this fire sacrifice, but he was not spiritual. He was not thinking of the ultimate purpose of the fire sacrifice. On the other hand, Lord Shiva, he was there. Now, he was not religious in the sense that he was not dressed appropriately for that particular occasion. He didn't follow the external etiquette of offering respects to Daksha when he came. But it was not, you could say, the not what you earlier said about not following a particular regulation. It was not
the neglect
because
of the regulation.
He was not. It was not because he was either ignorant or disrespectful. It was just, he was transcendental. He was at a higher level of consciousness. That's why I said he was spiritual, but not religious. Whereas
Right.
Daksha was religious, but not spiritual.
Right. Okay, now this is very interesting. Now we've just you've just described potential. In one sense, we could understand these two terms as synonymous, but what we're doing is we're speaking about them. We're creating the distinction between them that is commonly held. We're trying to articulate it and show how they could be understood different, right? Which is fine.
Okay.
And I think
Just 1 minute,
even
1 minute.
like yes.
Sorry, regarding the synonymous and difference, I forgot to mention one thing. Generally, when I talk about spiritual meaning, three things: the state of mind, the level of reality, and the process. The process to attain that level of reality or attain that state of mind. So generally, that process is what is called as religion.
Right.
But many people, if they don't know, okay, there is a higher level of reality to be attained, then what happens is they just do the religion without the spirituality. So we could say
they
that
haven't seen the peak of the mountain, but maybe they have no genuine spiritual experience, but they have a fear of the consequences of their sin.
yes,
So they take up the process.
yes, that's true. They have now, even religion itself is not necessarily a bad thing. That's at some level, some level of fear of accountability or fear or accountability that is good in one sense. But if you consider in terms of any relationship, say a parent-child relationship, the children should have a healthy fear of their parents. But at the same time, the relationship cannot always stay at that level of fear. It has to evolve to higher levels. If it doesn't, then it becomes problematic. If fear is the basic denominator for the relationship, then eventually, once the child grows up and feels that now I have my autonomy, I have my own independence, then that relationship, rather than evolving, it devolves. It leads to rebellion, it leads to rejection. And that's what quite often happens when people follow religion out of that fear. Or if I don't do this, I'll get some bad things will happen to me. And eventually they start feeling that, okay, now, there are so many people who are not doing what I am doing here. Not bad things are not happening to them. Or I did so many things and still something bad happened to me. So that level of fear it's a very preliminary level of practice. And
Right.
Srila Prabhupada, if we consider the way he presents the Bhagavatam, in the 5th canto, there are quite vivid descriptions of you'll come to the 5th canto later, that there are descriptions of the consequences of our actions. But Prabhupada practically never spoke in those terms. If you do this, you will go to this particular hellish condition or that particular hellish condition.
Suffer. Yeah.
His focus was more on, we are spiritual beings and we are meant for something higher than temporary pleasures. So the approach was not, you could say, fear driven, but more of intelligence or philosophy centered.
Okay.
That we are meant for something higher in life, then why settle for something lower?
So that's would be the second platform you're describing of the let's understand reality, right?
Yes, let's understand reality. Right, perfect.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so
So-
another
so-
way. Okay, so if
Please
I
go
can
ahead.
say spirituality, if I consider spirituality like a big circle, within that there is the philosophy aspect and there's the religion aspect. They are like two circles within that spiritual circle. Or you could say that these are two circles which overlap with the spirituality circle. Now religion can extend outside the spirituality circle also, where somebody may be religious but not spiritual. And philosophy can also extend outside the spirituality circle, where somebody may come up with some philosophy, but that has nothing to do with any ultimate reality. In the sense that I call it as not philosophy, but philosophy. Philosophy means the sophistry of fools. The sophistry, the false logic of fools. There was one philosopher, he said that life is meaningless. Life is meaningless and miserable. Therefore, the only philosophical question worth asking is whether to commit suicide today or tomorrow.
Right.
Oh, that is such a tragic way of looking at life. So that's not very helpful. So, but broadly, so the spirituality is like a circle, and you could say philosophy and religion are two circles within them. Now, both,
Okay, if I might just, so you just clarified something. I find that's very helpful. You said there are these three aspects to spirituality. One is the spiritual consciousness, which is the top of the mountain, and which is the goal. And then the second one is, you could say, now you're kind of characterizing as the philosophy, the understanding of reality. And then the third one was the path, the rituals, the practices, the regulations, etc., that you follow to move towards that ultimate top of the mountain, to the goal, to the spiritual consciousness. And so what you're pointing out is that, and what Bhagavatam points out, right? Like Bhagavatam will begin by saying all of the regulations that you practice, if they're not leading to remembrance of Krishna, which is the spiritual experience, then they're a waste of time, right?
Yes.
And similarly, one's philosophy, if also not engaged for that purpose, is also a misuse of it. And so what Bhagavatam is trying to do is align like all three. Understand what the spiritual goal is. Understand what reality is, so that you everything becomes clear to you, and understand and take the practices that are laid out, the quote unquote religious practices, and engage them for no other purpose but for achieving that goal. And if you get too caught up, if you have very dim view, if you don't have a clear picture of that spiritual goal or what spiritual experience is, and sometimes we get glimpses of that, and sometimes it's spoken to us, but if you don't have that clear in the mind, then it's likely that you get too caught up in just the ritual. If you don't have also an exemplar, right, like someone who is deeply spiritual, it is easy to get caught up on that level of the ritual, of the religious, of the process. The process means everything, but it's not even moving in the direction of the goal.
Yeah, it's beautifully put. If you connect this with the nature of understanding the nature of reality is the purpose of philosophy, and then outlining the path to get to that higher level of reality. That is you could say essentially religion. Religion is means to bind us, to connect us, to link us with the ultimate reality. Now the journey is a journey of consciousness. So what is it that is at the bottom of the mountain, and what is meant to get to the top of the mountain is our consciousness. So now it is the consciousness which experiences. And within the consciousness, there can be many different experiences we have. In fact, we can say at every moment we are experiencing something. Some experiences are relatively more memorable. Many are very easily forgettable. But beyond whatever experiences we have, there is the experiencer. And the experiencer can rise to a higher level of reality. So at one level, spirituality is such that anybody can experience the spiritual anywhere. I may be right at the bottom of the mountain, but sometimes because of some reason, I might just get a glimpse of the top of the mountain. So if you look at the history of spiritual people across the world, sometimes when they are in the midst of great distress, or they're in the middle of some even doing some depraved actions, at that time suddenly they have an awakening. Sometimes some people can have an awakening in a more sanctified kind of more of a spiritual kind of place, but you get a glimpse. So the experience is wonderful whenever we have it, but for that experience to become regular, there has to be the journey of consciousness. And so if we consider the nectar of devotion, the Bhakti-yogi Sindhu, it doesn't talk so much about spiritual experiences as spiritual states. Spiritual states. So experience is something which can come and go, but a state is relatively more steady. So if I'm at the bottom of the mountain, I can get some glimpses of the top. But if my consciousness has journeyed upward, then the vision of the top becomes much steadier.
Right.
So we want to go toward that spiritual state of consciousness.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was trying to think, I think most people that are using these terms and so on, there's a gradation of their understanding of even what they're trying to say. Sometimes their own experience can be a little bit hard to articulate or even understand. Like, for instance, I think a lot of times when people that identify as spiritual, when they speak about spirituality or their own spiritual experience, often it'll have to do with the connection to nature, right? Like, for instance, yesterday, where I'm staying, there's a river very beautiful river nearby, and a quiet spot. And I just went there. I went there alone, and and I dove into the river, and I spent time there. And I'm looking up the river, and I see, the river. There's a waterfall, like a small waterfall that the river is coming in, and I can see the mountains in the background where the river is originating. And I think people, when they find themselves particularly alone in nature, they can begin to feel like their daily experience of responsibilities and pressures and anxieties and so on is set aside. And in that moment, they begin to think about God, or they begin to think about their own, let's say maybe their own mortality, or they begin to look at their life from a new perspective, and they begin to feel, maybe they come in contact with an animal and they look at that animal and they feel a certain sense of communion with that animal and so on. And I believe that in one sense we can say this is valid spiritual, quote unquote, spiritual experience, that their consciousness is momentarily awakening to spiritual reality beyond their daily grind.
Yes,
But as you were
definitely.
saying now, to reach that state and deeper states of that, like, that is where spiritual practice is meant to take us.
Yeah, definitely. In the Gita, there is a concept called Vibhuti. In fact, the whole 10th chapter is called as Vibhuti. Now, Bhuti means existence or manifestation. Vibhuti means a special existence or special manifestation. So the way I explain Vibhuti is like the one above the many manifests as the one among the many.
The one above the many manifests as the one among
Manifests
the
as
many.
the one among the many.
Uh-huh.
So that could be in that nature, we could say, if we see a river, a mountain, a rainbow, these are one among many things existing within this world. But when we perceive them, we experience something beyond. We're not just, when we see the beauty of a mountain, see the beauty of a rainbow, we're not just perceiving that particular structure. We're experiencing something higher through it.
Mm-hmm.
So it is an experience of the divine. So this can apply to various things. It can, even Krishna says actually, Jayosmi Vyavasayosmi. He says, I am adventure and I am victory. So when some people have these living on the edge kind of sports, bungee jumping from a mountain top or from a plane, the thrill that they're experiencing is actually an experience of God. So the Gita tells us that our deepest experiences are actually our experiences of Krishna. Whatever is the deepest experience we have, that is our experience of Krishna.
Mm-hmm.
However, we may not realize that we are experiencing Krishna.
Right.
We may say, oh, this is something special. This is something extraordinary. But what is it? One of my main services is writing. So I was reading about the celebrated writers of the last century. And among the top 10 writers, almost everyone ended up with severe depression. 7, 8 of them committed suicide. And I read a little bit about it. What exactly happened? And one of the authors, she wrote that I cannot bear living with the thought that my best is behind me, not ahead of me.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, what she meant by that was that actually when somebody is creative, somebody's say writing something and they really write something well, at that time, it's not just their writing. It's almost like they connect with some source of ideas and energy from above, which works through them. And that's how they've been able to write something which becomes a classic. And then now next time when they try to write it, they're just not able to do it. because that
Right.
higher reality that is manifesting through them, it's no longer manifesting. And then it becomes unbearable. I was this good a musician, I was this good a writer.
Right.
Now I'm not able to do that. Just not able to do that. So that experience of, now the many words, even professional circles use the word flow. I'm in a flow now. So that's a state of
Yeah.
peak performance. So that is also actually experience of the divine, experience of the spiritual. The point is that we all experience something higher during various courses of life. So suppose somebody is watching a cricket match or any sports match, or maybe somebody's even watching a TV show and somebody's acting very well over there. Then they're captivated by that. So anything special that draws our attention, the Bhagavad-gita says that is a manifestation of the divine.
Right. Recognize it.
Yeah, it is a manifestation of the divine. The challenge, however, is that although everything attractive comes from the divine, everything attractive may not take us toward the divine. So, so
very important
essentially, yeah. So somebody can have spiritual experiences through any means practically. But will those means steadily take me toward the spiritual level of reality? That is the key question. So these extraordinary experiences we all have at various times. And when we have those experiences, what do we do after that? We need to explore, okay, what is the way I can progress toward getting those experiences on a regular basis?
Right. So in other words, Bhagavad Gita it's saying that there is such a thing as a very deep, constant state of spiritual consciousness. And you may have experiences in this world that are temporary glimpses of something glorious that gives you some access to experiencing that momentarily or for some point of time. But the value of that is meant to inspire one to follow the path to the steady, like Krishna will use words like satatam yuktanam or nitya yukta, where you're always connected to that spiritual source, always connected.
Yes, that's true. Like, say, if I go close to nature, if I see a beautiful mountain, one day I may have like a flow of thoughts which are very uplifting. But the next day I go in front of the mountain and I feel nothing over there. It's okay, it's there. What is the big deal about it? So what has happened is it's you could say that the object is not the source of the experience. The object is the stimulus for the experience.
Right.
And
the source is it's one small manifestation of the source, but it's not the source itself.
Yeah. So it is when our consciousness becomes more elevated, more attuned, then we can perceive the spiritual at various places. So what happens is when somebody is religious, so going back to our theme of spiritual but not religious, if somebody is too caught in being religious only, then they think that even if they have an understanding of the spiritual, they think that the spiritual will manifest only through is XYZ ways, ABC ways. That only when you go to a temple and pray to God, that's when you'll experience something spiritual. If you go close to nature, what you're experiencing, that is just mundane. It is just something mundane, feel good. Well, no, that can also be spiritual. So when we say religious but not spiritual, what happens is we reduce spirituality to certain predefined rituals or predefined dogmas. And that is unhealthy. On the other hand, if somebody says, I'm spiritual but not religious, and in that sense, they reject all religion completely, then what happens is they reduce spirituality only to a set of experiences which are highly inconsistent and unpredictable, non-replicable. I sometimes get it. For many times, I don't get it. So that's why, there's no path. There's no transformative process. Yeah, so that's why, in one sense, if you consider Krishna consciousness, you could say it is spiritual and religious. However, it is first spiritual and then religious. Because Krishna begins...
I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
No, because Krishna begins with analyzing the nature of reality. First, he says that our essential core is non-material. Our identity transcends our biology and our psychology, both. Now, we exist different from our bodies, even different from our mind and our emotions. So he begins with the spiritual aspect of reality, and then he talks about a pathway. So we, in one sense, to be transformed, to rise to the mountain, top of the mountain, we need to be both spiritual and religious. Religious doesn't mean simply following certain rituals, but adhering to a particular path, having a certain kind of discipline by which we can rise up the mountain.
Yeah, I love that. You know, and of course, Bhagavatam is starting right there by saying your religion, your regulations, and so on, they become meaningless if they're not leading to the goal of that path.
Yes,
they have no value then. But you know, I love what you're saying because
Shramaya Vahi Kevalam. It's a very strong phrase. It's just a waste of
complete
time.
waste of time.
It's
It's
actually even stronger. Shramaya Vahi Kevalam is not just a waste of time. It's almost like it's a wasted labor. Shrama is actually not just time, it's effort. Yeah, Shrama is effort, but it's just a wasted effort, wasted labor. Okay, so if one is not actually going toward the top of the mountain. Yeah.
But I also appreciate what you said, because we spent, and I think maybe amongst people in quote unquote spiritual circles, we may spend a lot of time condemning the shallow religious thought that's not leading to that. But it's also prudent for us to consider, you know, for any person that considers themselves to be spiritual and not religious, is my aversion towards quote unquote religion, you know, is it really because I'm getting to the essence and I'm trying to rid myself of all the cultural baggage that comes with religion, all the guilt and all the repression and meaningless ritual and so on? Or is that, you know, aversion to religion, does it stem from my aversion to regulating myself? You know, like, do I actually, you know, not have the self-discipline? And therefore, I've kind of rationalized that by saying I'm religious and not spiritual, which I think is a very real phenomenon too.
True. What happens is that at one level, disciplining ourselves in any way is painful. The Bhagavad-gita says that which tastes like poison in the beginning will taste like nectar in the end.
Right.
But most of us, the nectar seems to be too far away and the poison seems to be too much right now. Yeah. So we say, why should I have any kind of discipline? And saying that I'm spiritual but not religious can lead to a rejection of any form of self-discipline, any form of regulation as repression. So one way I differentiate between regulation and repression is that regulation means, if you consider a flow of water. Now, if you have a channel by which the water is directed toward a particular path, and repression means the water is just kept in a center, kept in a particular place without any direction at all. Mm-hmm. So it's like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Okay.
Right.
What am I to do? What is the direction? What is the direction I'm going to
do? That's a great analogy. You know, we're running out of time, but I just thought maybe just to get your thoughts on this, because hearing this comment, you've really clarified some things for me very nicely today. I appreciate it. I'm thinking that when we look at Bhagavad-gita and we look at Bhagavatam, the two, let's say, most fundamental bhakti shastras, the two most important texts that delineate the, you know, what is bhakti, what is bhakti practice, how to understand bhakti, how to practice bhakti. It seems to me like you could characterize the purpose of these books as distinguishing, as the encouragement to transcend religiosity and take it to the spiritual level. That's where Gita starts. And it seems like that's where they both start. And in one sense, not only do they start there, but like they begin and end there. It almost seems like the central purpose to them. You know, Arjuna, he gives religious arguments at the beginning of the Bhagavad-gita. And then Krishna's response to them in the second chapter, you know, is and right up to the end, you know, but beginning of the second chapter, you know, he's saying, if you're just concerned with you know, you're afraid of getting sinful reactions, you're afraid of bad karma, you're afraid of, you know, the bad reactions, and you live your life, you know, pursuing good reactions and avoiding bad reactions, then you never achieve samadhi. You never achieve a deep sense of spiritual experience. Bogaishvarya prasaktanam taya prahita chedasam, right? Samadho navatiyate. You never achieve anything deeply spiritual. And then it goes, then the Gita will go great lengths to give, Arjuna, in one sense, in the second chapter, asks, well, tell me, what does the spiritual person look like? Like, how do they act? How do they behave? How do they walk? How do they sit? And then we begin to hear like spiritual qualities, even-mindedness under all different circumstances, et cetera, et cetera. And Bhagavatam, same thing, as we're saying, like, it's setting out to kind of reject, we're hearing about Daksha here. We're going to hear about Daksha again, where again, he kind of like offends a deeply spiritual person with seeing his religious duties as superior or more important. But in one sense, it's almost as if all the stories in Bhagavatam are illustrating this point from different angles.
Yes, definitely. In one sense, if you consider the Bhagavatam is talking about, it's spoken to the king Parikshit. And Parikshit is actually a very religious king. He respects the sages. He's himself he's not only following, but he's ensuring that religious virtue is maintained in society. He disciplines the dark age of the personified age of Kali, who is trying to spread a religion. But even after all that, what happens to him is he's cursed. He's cursed to die in 7 days. So in one sense, if somebody is only religious without being spiritual, we use religious in that you do good, you'll get good. You do bad, you'll get bad. That's broadly the religious worldview. But that religious worldview eventually leads to frustration. Because in the world, we can say that whether we do good or whether we do bad, ultimately everybody has to grow old, everybody has to get deceased, everybody has to die. And if we if our religious worldview leads us to expect fairness in the world, we will end up with frustration. So what happens is, when he's cursed in that way, he could very well have asked, I was so virtuous, I was so religious, I was doing all my duties so well. But he didn't get frustrated. He saw that curse where he was to die in 7 days as an opportunity to rise to the spiritual level of consciousness. Where he put aside, so even if religion doesn't make one dogmatic, even if religion doesn't make one judgmental, even if religion doesn't make one irrational, but even then, religion alone cannot really equip us to face life's challenges. This is one of the key reasons why people lose faith. See, I did so much for my religion, for my God, and still why are so many sufferings coming in my life? So
Arjuna at the beginning of the Gita is right there as well.
Yeah. See, Arjuna, I was going to talk about that also, that he was actually, he had, you could say, ethical dilemma. Now, he's a good person. Should I fight to gain the kingdom? Should I fight against my relatives? What should I do? He was torn between two duties. The duty of protecting his citizens from a ruler who was an aggressor, exploiter, and the duty of protecting his dynasty, because that exploiter was a member of his dynasty. So what does he do at that time? So ultimately, just a religious worldview, it has its value, but life's frustrations will eventually bring us to a place where even our religion will not be adequate. And that's where, if the spiritual dimension is there, then we can rise toward a higher consciousness. Gotcha. Otherwise, we can't. We will end up frustrated. So he said that there is,
or as Bhagavatam will say, we won't achieve Atma Suprasidhiti, the complete satisfaction.
Yeah, Suprasidhiti. There is what you talk about salvation. There is release from distress, and there is relief amid distress. So we could say the ultimate purpose is that we want to release from distress. That is the state of attaining the top of the mountain. But if somebody is expecting that my religious practices in this world, I'll get released from distress, that's not going to happen. But if my religious practices can help me raise my consciousness above my situations, by circumstances, then we can experience relief even amid the distress. The distress is there, but our consciousness rises above. They're like, I'm the bottom of the mountain. there is a flood, there is a famine, there is a volcano. But if my consciousness is risen above, then I am not affected by that. So that's why, yes, religious practice is important, but the most important thing is understanding the spiritual and pursuing the spiritual.
Prabhu, you have, as always, been very helpful and enlightening and illuminating to us. I thank you for joining us again. We plan on bringing you back many, many times. But it's been a pleasure having you here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, bro. It's wonderful having this discussion. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
And we should mention we're back at 6 a.m. tomorrow for everyone that wants to tune in, back into the Bhagavatam at 6 a.m. And also, Nityananda Chandra's Shloka chanting group is taking place just after our show right now. So how do people find that, Mara, if they want to join that?
If they're Patreon members on the What's Up This Week email, I have Nityananda Chandra's email address on there, and they can reach out to him for the details.
So that's where you go for that. Thank you.
And tomorrow is also a big day. I believe it's your birthday, Kaustubha.
It is. Number 56. Getting old. Catching up with Raghu, right? He's got a little ahead of me. I got to catch up. Yeah, that is. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back. Raghu will be back tomorrow. And Mara, do we have, you want to run the dance cam? See who's
let's see who's
dancing today?
dancing.